All right, and we're rolling. So, if I'm going to cut a big thick slab off a block, make sure the clay is prepared well. So this clay's been wedged. I'm just holding a wear board flat on the top of this big block of solid clay and making a line that's pretty flat all the way around that block. And then I can cut this. There's other ways that people do this, and you can start from the bottom and make all the marks you want. But if I just do that over and over again, there's like one slab that's pretty thick, and I would just repeat that all the way down until I get like 4 slabs. You can make a whole block of clay into slabs by just making this mark. But I want to have enough slabs, at least 3, to show you different ways of stretching out this clay. Looks like I'll have 4. I said earlier, like, if you haven't worked in food industries, you'll struggle in life. It's so true in a lot of ways that we work in the ceramic studio. Like, I could think about rolling out dough, or working in a kitchen with most of this stuff. But anyway, like a common tool in the kitchen, or baking even. If you've done any baking, you'd like throw some flour out on the counter or whatever and make some crust. But here's like a big, thick slab. One thing that you guys may not have done is ever, because this is more plastic than dough. Like dough, you'd probably do with the rolling pin. But look at, like, this stuff's sticky. It's sticking to my rolling pin. I'm going to flip it and turn it often, right? And it's probably already like cracking and separating on the other side. If you want to keep things smooth, have your metal rib available. And that cracking is going to happen continuously. And this one's the thickest slab, so it's probably going to crack the most. Look at that. I'm already getting like a texture from this. I didn't bring out a whole lot of little texture tools, but sometimes they're hiding up here. Awesome. So I can use a lot of this. You can impress leaves or lace, or I could like put all sorts of different textures on there. You know, if you wanted to work with that, you could. I wouldn't do that till like the end. But look at how it's cracking and expanding. Some people like that stuff. And that little box over there has got a lot of that texture on it. But to keep it from happening, you know, just keep flipping your slab and keep smoothing this out if you don't want it to tear and rip. You can go back and forth. I've got these big sheetrock tools for troweling texture, like on a wall. You've probably textured plenty of sheetrock. And when you're taping seams, you got those long trowels. They work just like this, but bigger. You can just clean up your slabs super quick. So one thing is, you got to keep this rolling pin equal distance from the table if you want it to be the same thickness all the way through. Like I'm approaching maybe a 1/2 inch, but I don't want it to ride down too low on the edges. I want it to kind of all be the same texture. Or the same thickness. So what a lot of people do sometimes is, if you want it to be this thin, then get 2 strips of wood that thin and put it on either side, and then your rolling pin can ride on these rails and you get the same texture, or the same thickness that way. But if you're, you know, patient enough and observant, you can make it pretty close to the same thickness. And if you have no idea how thick anything is, then measure it. Like, stick your needle tool through it, put your finger on the clay, look at it and wonder, or put it on a thing. Look, I got 1/2 inch right now. So I'm going to go for a 1/4 inch or less. And notice how this tool is picking up a little bit of that clay, and it's making a mark every time I use it. So I would either clean that tool off so I wouldn't make that mark, or like get other tools that have marks on them and make deliberate things happen. You know, you could just make textures on little balls and roll those around. Get all sorts of fun stuff happening. You can even just like somebody made, I don't know, is that a bicycle? You can put little bikes on everything. Anyway, I want you to really explore the softness that this material has right now. And like even that texture, because I have a 1/2 inch slab and I want to get more of a 1/4 inch slab, now you can like stretch it a little more, and that 1/2 inch slab just became like 3/8, and that 3/8 just became more like a 1/4. And that's kind of what I'm going for, is something more like a 1/4. Alright, so now I got to set it on a wear board and let it cure. Is anybody using that wear board right there? I'll get one of my own, I guess. I don't want to take somebody's wear board. So having newspaper is always a good idea. There's not a lot of publications happening these days, so you might have to get creative. I was actually peeling off newsprint. I ran out of newspaper. But here I've got a wear board that's going to be able to accommodate that. I guess I'll just go get that big thing of newsprint. Usually there's like news and reviews and other things all over campus, and you just go and bring back stacks, but they're not here anymore.
I have a paper route, so my car's always full of paper.
Do you know the code to get in here?
No.
If you guys ever need to drop off material or pick up material, you can park right outside here. The code's written on the chalkboard over there. It's 2818 pound. And you can back up right here. We would be delighted to receive any kind of stacks of newspaper.
I have like.
We'll fill up cabinets with them. In fact, I think there's some in this cabinet over here. It's a thing that we love to use. Not much. A little help. Whoever thought you'd be in a newspaper shortage? What publication's still distributing papers?
My parents got a paper in.
Oh yeah, that's cool. I'm glad you're still printing. So I'm just going to let that set up. It won't stick to the board. I can move it around. I can go set it in the sun. I can lay it on the concrete. The concrete's absorbent. Plaster is really absorbent. But the sun is probably like the fastest way to get anything to set up. So I'm just going to sit that out there for a little while and make something out of this later today.
Is it so that doesn't stick to the board? Is the newspaper so that it wouldn't stick to the board?
Pretty much. If you got a lot of newspaper, I would put like a whole section, like 10 or 11 layers or whatever, and stack them. And that newspaper would just absorb water while they're sitting under plastic. You come back a couple days later, and everything's much more dry because the paper sucked the water out of the slabs. So like those, they kind of got to a point of workability, and I just stacked them up on top of themselves with many layers between them, and those newspapers are still absorbing some water, you know? So I'm going to be able to build with those today in a way that I'm not going to be able to build with this today, you know? And if you really like that stretchy texture, like you could do something now. to one side. Maybe do something else to the other. Let's see what happens. That's pretty cool. And then just see what happens with this. Pastry chefs would probably make some pretty cool slab work. Something like that. I don't know if that's a cool texture or not, but it's thin enough. It might be a little thin on the edges and it might be a little thick in the center, but I can still build something with that. So this throwing technique, you'll get a lot of long things, and you just turn it and throw it the other direction if you want to get the same width. But I'll show you over on the slab roller how you can kind of control things a little bit more with the same idea. Basically, I'm just stretching this clay. Maybe this time I'll make something really uniform and smooth. So this is maybe 1.5 inches, right? So I'm going to smooth my texture, keep it from really opening up any cracks or crevices. And then if you look closely over at these things, I think we're in range, you can dial this up or down. So if I'm about 1.5 inches, maybe I'll set this to about 1 inch, and I'll just get that to... You don't want to go to the 1/4 inch right away. It's just going to crack all the edges and really emphasize just how short this material is. I wouldn't even do it with store-bought clay. So, knowing that it's going to stretch this way, I keep more canvas on that side. And I bring, it's in between 2 layers. It'll stick to the roller and the table if you don't use canvas. So make sure your canvas is clean and flat. If there's any wrinkles in it, that makes it wrinkly. And for whatever reason, there's a gear on this, so you gotta roll it the opposite direction. And so it just smashed it out a little bit. Not much. So this is not truly 1 inch. It says 1 inch, but that's more like 1.25 inches. So even down at 1/4 inch, it's probably going to be more like 1/2 inch. So don't trust the gauge, but use it to set each side at the same, otherwise your slab is going to be like fat on one side and thin on the other. Pull that canvas till it hits the wheel, and you just keep working it back and forth. If it starts cracking, if it starts to crack, you can seal all those cracks with this. So if you want uniformity and smoothness, I would go for this one. If you want like expressive textures and stretchy marks and patterns, I would do it all by hand. And you can use the rolling pin or the throwing technique. You can use just this rolling pin if you want to be all tidy about it and uniform. So I'm going to go down to 3/8, which is probably more like 5/8. I still never remember what direction to roll this. So now it's longer in this one direction. If you want to maximize the area, or like you have a predetermined shape in mind, make sure that you're rolling this out in a way that's going to give you the shape of that plane that you want. So I just turned it 90 degrees. Now I'm going to turn this rectangle into more of a square. I'm going down to 1/8, which is going to be more like 3/8 probably. Oh, that really smooths it out. Well, that's more like 1/4. That might even be less than 1/4. So that gauge is not entirely accurate. But here I've got a really nice thin slab. This is going to set up quickly. The thinner your slab, the quicker it's going to be ready for you. So I smooth that side. It's pretty strong when you've got smooth textures. If my textures were open and stretching out without me sealing them, I would have never been able to pick that up and pull it off. So if you're making thin slabs with heavy textures and you know that you won't be able to lift it and move it, then a good idea is to lift it and move it with the canvas that's underneath it. Even in this situation, like if I wanted to bring this to a wear board, I would first get a board that's big enough and put some newspaper on it, or newsprint, or whatever you've got. And you can transfer it just using the the canvas. So a great way to carry this stuff is to pick it up by the canvas that it's on, like this, and then you can just flip it onto that and let it cure, or get firm. So whenever you're done with this, just put these back together so that they don't become like dirty or misused. And whenever you're getting ready to work with it, make sure that the edges of this are already under that roller so that whoever comes to this is good to go. So while those set up, I guess I got one more to roll. Any nice space in there? If anybody wants to go into my little studio, there's a big thing of that newsprint. You see that white paper under the plastic? Somebody grab me like 2 or 3 sheets of that. So you can do this by hand too and get it pretty close. Notice I'm keeping the edge really firm. It's pretty thick. It tends to crack on these edges. So I'm just squinching it by hand right now. This would be like, there's probably 10 more ways to make a slab. But if you didn't want to use a big table or a roller, right now the edges are probably the thickest part. There's a grain to newspaper and newsprint. If I tried to rip it the other direction, it probably would rip so straight. But I'm not going to change. So even if you wanted these to cure together, let's say you just like roll out a bunch of slabs one day, you can just stack them up on the wear board paper. Or like I said, you know, once we get all the newspaper that Savannah's gonna bring in, then just put many, many layers between them, and they'll just absorb that water while you're not even here. So this thing's pretty close just by hand, you know. I can even just mash it out some more. Some slab builders, like they do nothing but slabs, and they'll like take these covers off the light fixtures. If you feel the inside, it's like this diamond texture, and they'll lay that on the table, and they'll roll their slab onto anything. Like you could lay it on that grate, or you could go outside and press it into the wall and get all those rocks on there, you know. I've had teachers, they'll go to like canyon walls, and they'll take plaster casts of a canyon wall and peel that plaster off, back to their car, and then lay those in their studio and just press slabs into the texture of the canyon, and then build figures out of it. And these figures look like earth that are all scorched with fire. It's pretty crazy stuff. There's this guy, Paul Soldner. He used to make some things on the wheel, but mainly just a bunch of flat slabs that interconnected with these forms. He'd do these workshops, and then we would all be sticking our feet in it. You know, he'd be like, "Oh, Converse, yeah, that makes a really good one. Anybody have Vans? They got the." He knew it, like what brands made what texture. Oh, you bring that off the wall van over here. I had a professor, he did a van makes art series. So he would drive his van over this clay, and it would leave tire treads in it. He would throw a platter on the wheel and just like back halfway over the platter and then pull off of it, and just have this tire track go in and out. And there'd be like a teapot maybe sitting in the middle of it, and he'd smash the teapot into the platter and then hang this platter up on the wall, and it's just, he had pictures of his van all over the place, and he'd paint and scratch pictures of his van on cups and pots, and then most of it was run over by the van. But you would have to know the guy. I mean, he had that van for like 60 years, and it was on, like, he literally drove everywhere, and he drove all over the country. And so he was on like his 5th motor and his 4th transmission, and it was like millions of miles on this van. He loved that thing. So, you know, don't limit yourself with the amount of textures you can do. Like even, you could bring like I've got tablecloths and things that were made by my great-grandparents, you know, from like Norway. And I could embed those textures into this stuff and put them on there. You can, like I said, leaves. Some leaves have thick veins that work well. If you want to get like specific textures, then try and make the wall as smooth as you can first. Just so you have a more crisp registration of that mark you're looking for. And think about the inside of these things too. If you're going to leave like an opening so that you can see the inside of a vessel, it's pretty phenomenal. I've got this slab piece that I drink out of all the time, and a friend of mine made it. And the nice thing is, like, as you're drinking it, you realize the inside's got just as much information and texture than the outside, probably even a better texture. So you can texture both sides of these things and make round cups or square forms or whatever.